Okay, so when we've got all of these different things in place and we've got techniques for different things that we've looked at, I'm going to start again. Okay, so to finish off, we're going to look at putting it all together, and we're going to look at a practical framework for how we're actually going to use some of these skills. So once we've got our awareness dealt with in terms of what anxiety actually is and how we respond to it, and then we've looked at our blueprint and we've looked at our values and our rules and our beliefs. Then we've looked at physiology and how changing our physiology and using our physical kind of being can override anxiety. We've then looked at psychology, and in this instance we've looked a little bit about submodalities and in terms of auditory and visual, as well as questioning certain things. We've also looked at inner and outer criticism, as well as practice. And putting those things together, we end up with how do we actually apply this into these situations. Now, just before we go on to music, I'm going to look at it in terms of one of my own fears. I think I mentioned a tarantula earlier on, but my worst fear actually is a huntsman spider, because they're about as big as a tarantula, but they move very, very fast and they look much more spider-like. And I saw one in a glass case in a shop several months ago, and I think that is possibly one of the most terrifying things I've seen. Now, I'm sure they're actually very beautiful, elegant creatures, but the idea of ever holding one at the moment would be impossible for me to think about. But what I would do if I was to think about doing this would be what we call gradual exposure therapy. And this is what I want to look at in terms of playing music as well. If I was actually trying to deal with holding a large huntsman spider, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I've made it look quite sweet there, but they're not. Look at YouTube, writing huntsman spider. I wouldn't immediately go straight to the holding thing, okay? I wouldn't pick a huntsman spider up. I would do it gradually. So it might be that the first step that I do is simply look at a lot of pictures and just get myself used to the actual image of them. I might even read about the spider and actually learn about them, because that might help me kind of slowly understand a little bit about the spider itself. Then I might look at footage of huntsman spiders, and if there was a documentary on them or something which actually informs me a bit about the huntsman spider and their life cycle and what they actually do, it's again gradually exposing me to the huntsman spider, but also desensitizing myself to it. It might be also that using the submodalities exercise, for example, if I've got a vision of this huntsman spider running straight towards me every time I think about it in full colour, right up close, I might do the kind of black and white, move it away, because again this takes away a little bit of the emotional content of the memory or vision of it. I then might, if there is one sort of available, look at a live one through the actual glass case and actually study it for a while and get used to it slowly. I might then have an opportunity again, if there was an owner that was able to sort of do this, to actually touch the spider itself without necessarily picking it up. And at some point, and it might be 6 months down the line, I might be able to hold one in my hands. But what I wouldn't do, as I say, is leap straight into the moment of holding it. Now, this is exactly the same when we're thinking about rebuilding our confidence, for example. If we've suffered from anxiety with music, is not to leap straight into a really, really stressful event where there's an audience of like 100 people sitting watching you in a great performance thing with a stage and lights. There is a better way of doing this. So if I was applying this fear pyramid, this kind of gradual exposure therapy to music itself, again, if I was perhaps rebuilding my confidence after maybe I'd had a difficult sort of time as a musician, or even if I was just wanting to get back into music and performing, rather than leaping straight into something very stressful, I'm going to use Ronnie Scott's as my example as a jazz musician, because it's quite a famous club and it might be full of people that really appreciate jazz and genuinely listen to it. So if I had Ronnie's as the top, I'm not going to leap straight there really. But there might be something to be said about just going for it, but it might go wrong. I would rather use some of these techniques and gradually use them throughout this fear pyramid. So it might be first of all that I work on my set and actually simply practice it in a practice room and play it in a practice room, and maybe record, as I suggested, myself and listen back to myself. So that would be step one. I might then do a kind of impromptu concert in a practice room or at my house in front of a few friends, just to get used to the idea of performing and see how it affects me. And you could even say as an experiment, if I start to feel nervous, do you mind if I kind of use one of these techniques, a sort of slow breathing technique? So you actually get used to using the techniques within a very, very unstressful but just slightly stressed environment. I might then, if I find family a kind of like nerve-wracking affair to perform in front of, get my family to watch the next because hopefully they'll be supportive of it. Or it might be sort of like a larger collection of friends in a place that's not necessarily in a practice room, for example. Then I might do it in a pub gig. It might be a pub gig, or it might be a restaurant, some sort of background music or something playing sort of in the background of a wedding where people are not really watching particularly, but there is a performance level to it. The next one might be that I put on a local concert. It might be at a church or a village hall or whatever. But again, a kind of slightly more controlled one, but it gets me used to playing to an audience that are actually sitting down now and watching it. And then finally, Ronnie Scott's. This is if I was asked. But this is a way of actually slowly using some of these techniques and trying them gradually rather than leaping straight into something stressful. And I think this is a really useful feedback process for musicians to use if they lack confidence. So I hope this has been useful in terms of looking at these 8 different dimensions of handling anxiety. And what I would suggest is that you go over each of these 8 kind of aspects that we've covered, and then look at techniques that you find useful and create your own kind of toolbox of these techniques, and then apply them into this gradual exposure therapy format. Thank you very much indeed.